Good morning. The topic for today is the hidden game, and with me is my beautiful assistant, lovely lady.
Good morning. Um, Life is a game. Either you play it or it plays you. This is something of a mantra for you, John. What do you mean by it?
Well, if we take the financial markets, for example, the novice trader, every novice trader is educated in exactly the same way, and they're trained to place their trades in exactly the same locations. One of the absolute fundamentals of trading is that you contain your risk. So, therefore, it is axiomatic that the trader then places a stop loss where they are going to exit the trade after suffering a certain amount of price movement against them. Okay, so far so good. This then translates to the risk that they are willing to absorb. Makes sense, you have to contain your risk. It makes eminent common sense. Now, according to certain other rules, they then place these stop losses in predictable places, which are again eminently logical, based on the instructions they've received. But the operative word here is predictable. These are the precise locations where those who drive the market wish to enter the market.
It might be helpful if you provided a sample, or I should say a simple example of that would demonstrate your point.
Well, for example, novice buys at $5, and when the market goes down against them, he sells at $4. Now, the question is, who do they sell to? Who's on the other side of that transaction? Since all the novices wouldn't be buying there, it's the player, one of the insiders. The insider, who I refer to as the player, now is able to get that same security, commodity, whatever it is, for $4 instead of having to pay $5. And that was, in fact, the purpose of the entire charade.
Well, how does the novice feel about all of this?
I mean, one thing I'd like to add then is, of course, then prices being driven by them, up in the future. So the question, how does the novice feel about all of this? Well, basically they don't really realize what's happened. So meanwhile, the novice is left with this sickening sensation of having been right in his assessment of the direction of the movement of the market, but off in his timing. So how will they, make sense out of this? They will chalk it up to luck or bad luck and go right back at it again. Of course, only to suffer the same fate. Occasionally they will win, and in fact this is part of the trick. And this is then what keeps them addicted, that possibility of winning. So over time they will become discouraged as they start to lose much more than they win. They go along the way, and eventually along the way they will try one strategy or another, and eventually coming up with their own version, their own hybrid strategy, which they'll be very proud of and share with other traders. And then they will at first believe that their losses are as a result of not applying their strategy with sufficient discipline. But after another period of time, they will begin to ascribe their poor results to just plain luck, plain bad luck, or some external supernatural force that is actually acting against them. And interestingly, as absurd as this sounds, they are actually half right in both cases.
Could you elaborate for our viewers exactly what that looks like?
Well, the vast majority of people do not faithfully apply whatever system they're applying. That much is true. And in fact, there is some external force that is dictating their fate, as opposed to it being simply just random chance, which is explaining their losses. So, in the first case, no matter how disciplined they are, they will fail if they are applying the wrong strategy, the wrong system, so to speak. In the second instance, they are in fact subject to an outside force, but it is not supernatural, but in fact very human.
But are we not in a game of sorts?
Oh, actually, very much so. They're in a game, and that much they know. Particularly people who are traders know they're in a game. But the rules they've been given are in fact a misdirection, an integral part of the big con. For there is a deeper set of rules that are really in play, and they are the ones that determine who wins and who loses.
What would you say are the key elements of this thing you refer to as the game?
Well, even though there are an infinite number of games, they all essentially share the same structure. So now, taking this metaphor, let's extract the main elements of what I refer to as the game. One, the game has two types of participants: insiders and outsiders. Number two, over the fullness of time, the insiders always win and the outsiders always lose. And finally, number three, in order to keep the outsiders in the game participating, it must be disguised. It must remain hidden.
Would you say it is fair to say that this game is the deep structure that lies embedded within the Western system?
Well, yes, that's seemingly taking a great leap, but I think you're right. So by Western, I think you're referring to a system that is nominally democratic, nominally capitalistic, and nominally ruled by law. So in reality, we have the illusion of freedom in place of democracy, the illusion of a free market in place of capitalism, and finally, the illusion of law with a regulatory and procedural labyrinth, or leviathan, impossible to navigate. So these are in fact all the subterfuges through which the 1/100th of a percent, rather than the 1%, can secure their position at the top, while encouraging the rest of society to opt into the game.
What would you say is the key distinction between democracy and autocracy with respect to the game?
Excellent question, and I think this is the thing that is so often missed, because the real effective distinction between autocracy on the one hand and democracy on the other is in very little. It's really substance as opposed to, rather it's really form as opposed to substance. Nonetheless, up to this point there has been a real advantage to democracy, that being that the inmates largely police themselves. So this then requires a much lighter touch on the part of the ruling caste than does autocracy, which requires the heavy hand, the jackboot. However, this has a limited shelf life, because sooner or later the population catches on to this game. It takes them a while, but they do catch on. And the illusion starts to fray at the edges. So now, with the Trump administration, we have reached the point where the powers that be that direct Trump and his cast of sycophants no longer even feel the need to hide the heavy hand that lies behind, that lies inside the velvet glove. And with that, we shall conclude for this morning. Thank you very much for being with us, lovely lady. Goodbye.